Thank you everyone for joining us again today. We do have apologies from our MC Mike Inglis. He's been called away on some urgent MPI business, so I'm sure he's saving the country for all of us. But he wishes all of you well today and hopes you enjoy the exercise. So we're going to start this morning off with a karakia, which will be given by Kiana Ellen Muka, who is our wonderful Executive Coordinator at KVH.
Morena and tēnā koutou katoa. Kia tātou e tau nei, kia ora. My name is Kiana Alamuka and I work for Kiwifruit Vine Health, and I'd just like to start the morning with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, hei huarahi mō tātou e te rangi nei, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Kiana. So just some housekeeping this morning. For safety and to ensure that in the unlikely event of an emergency, we exit through the entrance that we came in. There's also an exit at the far end of the building. The toilets are at the far end on the right, and just a reminder, there's no vaping or smoking on site, please. So the purpose of today is to have an exercise event which will be run in partnership with KVH and Biosecurity New Zealand. And that's to help improve our preparedness to biosecurity threats. So last year, our exercise was focusing on the importance of collecting traceability data, and this year we're looking at spotted lanternfly, which is to help build our generic readiness and to make sure that if we do face an incursion, we've got the opportunity to look at this particular organism so that we're more prepared, because it will have significant impact to the horticulture industry and kiwi fruit as well. So we've got a few objectives for the day. One of them is to improve our understanding of how GIA responses operate and the different components and roles that are involved, and then how you potentially fit into the response model. We want to grow awareness of one of our key threats and your knowledge of how to report this if you see it. We want to look at how the kiwi fruit industry KiwiNet group of biosecurity champions can be involved in the process. And then we want to test our readiness plans as well. So we want to make sure that we've got things developed that we can use if we do have a response. So the approach that we're going to take is to set the scene with a few presentations before handing over to Angus, who's our Chief Controller, and he'll take us through the interactive sessions for the day. So our first speaker will be joining us from Biosecurity New Zealand, Jessica Roach, who's our Relationship Manager, and she'll present on how a response is initiated or started, and also provide us an introduction to the Coordinated Incident Management System, or commonly known as CIMS. Thank you, Jessica.
Kia ora. Thank you. My name is Jessica Bosch. I'm GA Relationship Manager at Biosecurity New Zealand at MPI. I work in Mike Lawson's team, who you heard from yesterday, and also with my colleague Finn here. Today I'm going to talk to you about the process from incursion to response and about the specific roles that fall under GA. So first, a little bit about GA. The government's industry agreement is a partnership between industry and the Crown. The purpose is to achieve better biosecurity outcomes, both for the primary industry and for the whole of Aotearoa, New Zealand. We aim to reduce the risk and harm of unwanted organisms from entering and establishing in New Zealand. So this partnership is formalized through an agreement that we call operational agreements for biosecurity readiness and response, and there are two key principles there. One is shared decision-making between industry and the Crown, and the other one is cost sharing. GIA was initially set up with as a recognition that having industry involved would result in better prioritization of spending. And as we heard yesterday, KVH was the first industry to join in 2014, 10 years ago. On the right side here, it's just an illustration to show that engagement under the GIA span across the biosecurity system. So it goes from pre-border, border, readiness and response, and all the way to long-term pest management. But the joint decision-making and cost-sharing aspect of GIA only applies to readiness and response. So just before I jump into the step-by-step process from incursion to response, I wanted to highlight what's special about GIA in this process. Under GIA, industry partners would get an early notification of suspected unwanted organisms that may be a biosecurity threat. There would be a shared initiation decision on whether or not to start a response between the Crown and industry, and shared governance, so industry would have a seat at the decision-making table and be part of response governance group. The last point here is just to illustrate that depending on the pest or disease, there may be multiple GIA partners involved. And today we are going to be working on spotted lanternfly. So as an example, there could be KVH, New Zealand wine growers, Summerfruit New Zealand involved in that kind of responses. Right, so this is the step-by-step process from incursion to response. And I want to highlight first the 4 boxes here with balls and with red frame around them. That's where the GIA framework makes the whole process a little bit different, and I'll run you through the step-by-step. So it all starts with a notification. Usually people report using the 0800 pest and disease hotline, that's the MPI phone number, or they can also use the online notification form. And anyone can report to MPI. So it could be professionals, members of the public, biosecurity or industry partners, or it can be done through routine surveillance programs. And yesterday, you may recall that we heard about the process within KVH for notifying of suspected unwanted organisms that may be a biosecurity threat. So a KVH can do an early triage, and if they deem that there's potential biosecurity threat, then they would inform MPI. From there, we move on to the investigation. So that's the second point here. And the MPI incursion investigator would usually get in touch with the notifier to find out a little bit more information about the suspected find, the unusual symptoms. They may want to know more about the geolocation of the find, potentially take some pictures and samples. And these samples would be analyzed at the MPI Plant Health and Environment Lab, or PHEL. There's one lab in Auckland and one in Christchurch. At that point, the incursion investigators need to make an assessment on whether or not they deem the report to be a potential biosecurity threat. If not, the process stops here. But otherwise, we would be moving on to the next bullet point, which is with some actions being put in place. Some of the urgent measures can be voluntary, and they can be things like movement controls for risk goods. And also it's on that stage in the process that the Chief Technical Officer would be informed and a rapid assessment report would be produced. That report is a key piece of information to decide whether or not to start a response. The kind of information in the reports are information on the potential pests, who may be involved, and the different type of impacts across multiple values, not just economic. And it's also around that stage that there would be an early notification to KVH and other potential industry partners. MPI would also notify utility partners as early as possible. Next on, using the rapid assessment report, GIA partners would, along with both the Crown and industry, would decide whether or not to start a response. So that's a joint decision, really. And if the response is deemed necessary and is approved would be stood up and a governance scope would be formed. Again, there would be both industry and the Crown sitting at the decision-making table. And then the next slide, I'll be talking a little bit more about the governance scope. And finally here, not all responses are the same. Eradication is not always the response objectives, and responses can transition to what we call long-term management or pest management programs, which go slightly beyond this process from incursion to response. And if there are two key things, I guess, in this process. First is reporting. Without an initial report, there is no measure put in place to manage that. And the other one is the importance of governance scope. Right, I'll touch on that briefly, but response governance is really key for response. They set up the strategic directions of the response. So they agree on response outcomes and objectives, and they ensure that this remains fit for purpose all through the response. They also ensure appropriate resourcing of the response, and they endorse the controller. Finally, governance group agree on triggers for review, exit, or transition out of response, potentially to long-term management. And one of these triggers is a fiscal cap that's agreed under the operational agreements between industry and MPI. Ultimately, the operational control of the response is delegated to the response controller. And last slide, don't be scared by the level of detail here, but this is a full SIMS hierarchy, so SIMS for Coordinated Incident Management System, and it just illustrates that response can be scalable, and there are different groups of people involved depending on their functions. So governance, as I said, sit at the top with the strategic direction of the response, and underneath that is the controller who looks after the operational control of the response. And the controller puts together what we call an incident management team, lots of different functions that we heard about yesterday. And the one with the red boxes around them today are the one that will be useful for the exercise that we're about to start. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. We won't go to questions for Jessica yet. We'll move to the next speaker, and then we can have combined questions from the audience. So please join me in welcoming Matt Dick, who's the KVH Biosecurity Manager, to present on KiwiNet. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Leanne. Morning, everyone. So this is just a quick refresh on what KiwiNet is. Some of you will have been involved in KiwiNet previously, others may not know what this is. We haven't actually activated KiwiNet for a response for about 5 years, so really the purpose is just to remind, and then we can go through and update our KiwiNet contact list. So KiwiNet was established in 2014. And it's our network of biosecurity champions and also our deployment mechanism to put industry people into a response. So we've got a handbook on our website, and we've undertaken a lot of training over the past years, such as the SIMS training in that photo there. So as a network of biosecurity champions, it's about pushing out proactive messaging, but it's also about if we have a response and there's a need for additional capability to put into a response, then we can put it mainly into the operations part of the SIMS model, which Jessica just mentioned. It's not exclusively there, but that's typically where the greatest manpower is needed. Danny talked about yesterday with the Varroa response in Australia and how they were upscaling, and within a week they needed hundreds of people on the ground in a response. Typically that's in the operations, and if there's a call for additional resource, then we can put KiwiNet people, industry people, into the response there. So we have done this on a couple of occasions with fruit fly responses. So the first one was in 2015, and this was one of the first occasions where industry and government were working together under a GIA response. And we can see, I mentioned yesterday, we had this Cricket World Cup right in the middle of the controlled area. So it was a great opportunity to put these communications out, just showcasing that horticultural sectors were really impacted by this, and we're working together with government to get on top of it. We put KiwiNet people into the response, industry people. Some of the roles that were used were fruit fly trapping, as shown in that picture there, which is just basically going out and putting these traps in people's backyards, and fruit collection as well. In 2019, there was another large fruit fly response in Auckland, and again we activated KiwiNet and put industry people into the response. Ended up being about 600 people days of kiwifruit industry people used in the response. And you can see in the photo there, John Mather from KVH, he was at the Northcote or Devonport ferry terminal, just really engaging with members of the public and explaining what's going on and what movement controls are in place around the movement of fruit. We've found that having an industry voice in a response is really useful. It really resonates quite well with the public, and it's an opportunity for us to explain what's at stake and why we need the public's support in adhering to these movement controls, because the public are really a key part of this response. So basically how it works is each industry organisation can have a KiwiNet coordinator, and we like to have a backup coordinator as well. If there's a response and that we need extra capability, which is normally people, but it could be machinery or spray equipment or other resources as well, then KVH gets notified. We reach out to those KiwiNet coordinators, and then they reach out to their respective industry or their respective organisation, and basically find out who's available and who can be put into the response. When you get to the response, there'll be training and an induction provided, accommodation, you get your response ID, and you'll be paired up with more experienced staff to show you the ropes and what's required. So really what we need from our KiwiNet coordinators, we like to have biosecurity champions, someone who really believes in the cause and is happy to go out and campaign and get people motivated and deployed into the response. An appropriate level of seniority to actually make the request from their organisation for people to be deployed, and then able to assist with both coordinating the deployment and that ongoing support of their staff in the response if needed. Don't necessarily need to be deployed themselves, it's more of a coordination role. So if that sounds like you, then we'd love to hear from you, and we'll be in contact updating our KiwiNet list. And we'll be doing that over the next few months. And then we'll look at some small-scale capability exercise later in the year to really focus on kind of the nuts and bolts of working in a response and what that might mean. So you can come see Linda or I if you think you'd be a good KiwiNet coordinator, or you want to know who your coordinator is for your organisation. And just mention as well that in parallel with GIA, that the deployment of people into response has been evolving as well. Some of those earlier responses were the first time that industry people have really been put into response, and we've been working through with MPI and Assure Quality how that might work, how those logistics functions work, and how that deployment of industry goes on. And we recently had a fruit fly exercise to step through those learnings from the last response and make sure they've been addressed into the response system. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So we've heard from Jessica, who outlined what happens at the beginning of a response. It's great there is a process because it manages expectations on what should happen, especially with response governance with industry and government being involved. Thanks, Matt, for covering off KiwiNet and how the biosecurity champions are involved in responses as well. Do we have any questions on Slido, Lisa, or questions from the floor for our two speakers? A reminder that you can use Slido and there is a QR code on the table if you'd like to use that functionality. No? Okay. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next speaker, who's going to cover off what is spotted lanternfly from his experiences. So I would like to welcome Simon Cook, who's the chair of KVH, to share the lessons from abroad that he saw during his Nuffield Scholarship study tour. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Leanne. Morning, everybody. All right, so in 2018, I had the opportunity to travel around the world as part of a Nuffield Scholarship, and I took the opportunity to look at biosecurity incursions all around the world. And so, well, one of those trips was into Pennsylvania. So we'd had Dr. Tracy Lesky come to New Zealand to talk about BMSB. Some of you may remember the speeches that she gave that when KVH brought it to New Zealand. So I'd gone back to catch up with her in the States to look at what they were doing with Trisolcus japonicus, the samurai wasp, because they were obviously breeding and working with it in Pennsylvania. So while I was there with her, she started talking about spotted lanternfly, which was a new incursion that they were dealing with just starting off. So the US incursion of spotted lanternfly, they think started in about 2015, and it came in on paving stones out of China. So when those paving stones arrived, they then forward traced where else in the States they went to. One of those places was the place that I then went and visited, which was called Winchester. And so in Winchester, they'd forward traced these paving stones to the site where they ended up, and then they monitored that site. For 2 years, they couldn't find a trace of spotted lanternfly. Then in 2017, they started finding them. One of the issues with spotted lanternfly is at that point in time, there was no pheromone traps, there was no way of attracting them, so it was very much just visual observation and just going to the site and monitoring around and trying to spot them. So they did that for 2 years with no sign, and then finally in 2017, they started to see them. I arrived in 2018, so the incursion in Winchester had been visual for about a year after I arrived, and within that year, they'd translocated about 1 mile, so they'd moved in a 1 mile radius from where they'd first found them. Where it was in Washington, you can see from the photo, was a railway line, and so they'd arrived just next to this railway line, and all along the railway line are ailanthus trees, or tree of heaven. And so the tree of heaven is one of the favourite hosts of spotted lanternfly, so they were just slowly tracking their way down this railway line. So they'd stepped up a response to spotted lanternfly in the States, and we're just starting to engage with it. And so when you travel around, whenever there was a park in an area that had spotted lanternfly, they were starting to put up signs to warn people about it. Within Pennsylvania, across the borders, they started to have movement control. So if you were driving a truck in and out and you're carrying produce and you're travelling through a spotted lanternfly zone, you had to have certification. And so you can see on the right there, there's permits that they all had to carry. And so that involved inspection of the vehicles, the trucks, etc., because spotted lanternfly like to lay their eggs on anything. So the egg masses were found on stones originally, that's how they got in, but on the side of a container, on metal, on a fence post, on anything is where they'll lay their eggs. So it becomes very difficult to track them because of that egg movement. So this is where the spread of spotted lanternfly is today after 3 or 4 years. So when I was there, it was just a couple of sites, just the one in Winchester where I said, and Reading. And so Reading was kind of where the central arrival was. Winchester was about 2 hours drive away. So it had been co-located by people in those two. And itself, it doesn't spread far. So on its own, the insect doesn't travel. It has 4 stages of crawler, the 4 instar stages, and then it becomes an adult, which is where we see the more like a fly version. And so The instars just crawl up and down on the outside of buildings. The fly itself will travel a little bit, but it doesn't tend to travel far, so it kind of more just floats, and it won't travel a long distance as a fly, so it's more travelling as a passenger host. So when I did the first one in Winchester, I started there. It didn't really concern me what I was seeing, because you're only seeing a few of these spotted lanternfly. They weren't really doing much. They weren't really travelling, so it was kind of, you know, in my head I thought that with a decent baiting program or a decent chemical program, you could probably control them and get on top of them. The States has issues in terms of being able to do that because of property rights, etc. They don't have a Biosecurity Act which enables their vision of MPI to go onto properties and manage it. Over there, a person's property is sacrosanct. So they don't. If you have a property that's got an incursion in the middle of it, you can't go on it if they won't allow you onto it. So it then becomes a reservoir for reinfecting and spreading. So it's very difficult for them to manage these incursions on a national basis. When I went back to Reading where the original incursion was and you started to see these in larger volumes, what really struck me, and you'll see from the photos here, was the sooty mould that was growing around it. And when I was walking up to an area where you could see these plants, you could see the sooty mould before you could see the insects. And so for someone that's come out of, my original kiwifruit orchard was a 0.8 hectare green orchard with big banks either side, and it was always a battle dealing with sooty mould from passion vine hopper. And I know of other growers in a really bad passion vine hopper year lost 20 to 30% of their crops to this. So, you know, for someone that has come from a background of battling sooty mould, when I saw this thing, it was like, Jesus, this would be a huge problem for us if it ever arrived in New Zealand. And so you can see from the photo on the right the size of this thing. So physically, they're, you know, a reasonable size. You think the size of what a passion vine hopper is, this is like 10 times the size. So the amount of damage that you get from sooty mould from a passion vine hopper, this would be 10 times worse. So that kind of put to me the scale and the reason this was such a big issue. So within the photo, you can see on the left-hand side, you can see the blackening on the leaf already. So that's, you know, I could see that before I even got to see the insects. You could see it from a long way away. Same with the staining at the bottom of a tree. So one of the places I visited was called the Pagoda, and as I was walking down the hill away from it, there was a great big Ailanthus tree, a tree of heaven sitting there. And before I got to the tree, I could see the blackening on the ground around the base of it, so it attracted me to go over and look at it. And so I was standing underneath. You could actually feel like a faint drizzle. That was the amount of honeydew that was coming out of the tree. So you could actually feel a drizzle. It's yeah, it was interesting to say the least. And so talking with the researchers in this area in Reading, they've got people that are having to water blast their decks twice a year simply because the deck is that black with sooty mould that they're having to water blast it twice. So yeah, you put that in context of the issues that we already have with passion vine hopper, and it starts to understand why this is so scary for us. So here's a little video. So that's a full adult there that's just hanging out, and then you'll start to see some of the instars. So the white ones, the third generation, when they get to the fourth generation, they become red. And so they just hang out and crawl up and down things. So this was back in Reading, so this is where you're starting to get into a higher volume. So once the incursion starts to really take hold, they're easy to find. They're not scared of people. They just hang out on a tree and crawl up and down all day quite happily. So once you know what you're looking for, they're quite easy to find. So the reason I wanted to include this one as well is you can see the little one crawling down. When you get to the bottom of the video, you start to see the silvering on the leaf. That's honeydew. And so that's the start of just how much you start to see. And as I said, when you get to these areas, you can see that shining from a long way away because that's the level of honeydew that's sitting there. So yeah, that's why it was such a concern for me. All right.
Thanks so much, Simon, for sharing your experiences. To me, going around the world and seeing biosecurity pests and diseases sounds like the trip of a lifetime, but I'm a super biosecurity geek, so I know you are too. We do have our next presenter, who is Erin Lane, KVH Senior Biosecurity Advisor, who's going to present on spotted lanternfly readiness and response, and then we'll take questions for both Simon and Erin. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Simon did a great job at setting the scene of why we're so concerned. So today I'm just going to touch on the organism itself and then talk about some of the readiness activities we're doing to prepare and what our responses could look like if we found ourselves with this organism. So I thought I'd just start with some fast facts about spotted lanternfly just to get the room with the head around the organism that we're going to be talking about today. So it's from China originally, and it likes a whole lot of hosts. So it feeds on over 70 plant species. Kiwi fruit is one of those, but it has a real affinity for grapes. Sophie mentioned it yesterday in her talk. It just seems to really love them. So that top picture there, or those top two pictures, are spotted lanternfly on kiwi fruit in China, and then you look below, that's spotted lanternfly on grapes. So in that late season, it really loves to flock to grapes, and it causes some really big issues for them. So the bug itself, spotted lanternfly, it's primarily a plant stressor, so it feeds on the sap of the plant, and it gets there in such huge numbers that it really reduces the resilience of the plant. It doesn't often kill the plant itself. Grapes is an example of where it might, but generally it doesn't kill the plant, but it loses that resilience, so it opens it up to a whole range of other things like disease or environmental conditions that a healthy plant could withstand, but a plant from spotted lanternfly might not. And Simon touched on this, but it's kind of secondary problem, and probably the biggest impact for us is that sooty mould production. Those are some pictures there of Tree of Heaven, but it just rains down that honeydew, and that sooty mould will be the key issue for us. Not a great flyer, as Simon said. It's got beautiful wings, but it's actually a plant hopper, so it hops around. It climbs up trees and then it hops over to find the next host. So on its own, it can kind of travel 30 to maybe 40 metres if the wind's blowing well. But it is a fantastic hitchhiker, and that's how it makes its way around really fast. So lays its eggs on anything, hard to find. But that bottom picture there is actually a spotted lanternfly hanging onto a car going 100 kilometres an hour. So even the adults and nymphs have a real ability to use us to spread themselves around. It breeds a lot. It's a prolific breeder, so those are some egg masses in grapes. But it lays its eggs on any surface, and then it covers it with this waxy coat, which means that it kind of protects it from the elements, but also means that it's quite hard to manage with insecticides and other things. And it also often lays its eggs really high up in the canopies, so you don't find too many. If there's an option to lay it kind of 6 feet and up, then it'll choose that before laying it lower. So they protect themselves pretty well, and a spotted lanternfly adult can lay a couple egg masses with 50 eggs in it, so one adult can kind of generate kind of 150 for the next population. It is a real social nuisance as well, so Simon talked about that sooty mould on people's decks, but it also flocks in numbers when you've got it in the public, in spaces, and it's just a real pest for people. So it has that social nuisance aspect as well as that kind of potential commercial impact as well. So it's been a bit doom and gloom, but in better news, it actually currently where it lies across the world, it has quite a low likelihood of getting here to New Zealand. So it's those egg masses that it overwinters as that are the most likely to come here. But their hatch rate, it's really temperature dependent. So the warmer it gets, the quicker they hatch. So if you think vessels coming from the northern hemisphere down to the southern, they warm up really quickly. So those eggs that potentially could be found on containers or pallets, they'd likely hatch in transit, and then they've only got a few days without food or water for them to survive. So at this stage, where it's currently sitting, MPI's done a risk assessment and they consider it pretty low that it will get here alive. And we haven't had, to back that up, we haven't actually had any border detections, live border detections in New Zealand to date. So what are we doing currently? So while that likelihood remains low, we're doing a lot, we're doing some research to build our knowledge and to build our tools for what could happen here in New Zealand. So we have some national research through B3, so that's a collection of researchers and industry working together. We're looking at that dire pausing risk, so making sure that the current risk that we see as low is actually that, and we're doing some testing around those hatch rates. And we're also working really closely internationally in that next one with Julie Urban in Penn State, looking to understand what hosts here in New Zealand we need to worry about, and also possible management options. And then that picture there is just a picture from the port calendar that KVH collaborates on with MPI and the port, highlighting these risks to stevedores, as that's one of the main places they'll come in. And that is a dead spotted lanternfly, but it was noticed from the port calendar, so that awareness, we're building that awareness nationally as well to get people reporting. And we're also doing some industry-specific research in partnership with Zespri Innovation. So we started off with some literature reviews, both in the English language, but we know it's native to China. So we've also looked at doing some Chinese translation in that literature to understand how kiwi fruit goes with spotted lanternfly. And we know that spotted lanternfly is found on kiwi fruit, and it can be found in high numbers. But we haven't really been seeing that sooty mould issue as much as things like grapes. But when you have that native to native, a native pest with a native plant, you don't get the same interactions that you might get if it invades. So we're still working on that. We've done some work in China as well, looking at seasonality, knowing when the spotted lanternfly is found in kiwi fruit and when it comes in and out, so that should we get it here, we might be able to target our management around those movements. And we're in the middle of right now, we're looking at developing some tools for control. So we're looking at chemical control under our current crop protection standard for the control of nymphs and eggs, so to see if our timing and our rates work to manage the spotted lanternfly and kiwi fruit. And they're looking really promising at this stage, and we're looking to do some field testing coming up. So can we learn offshore? So we're really lucky, and I think we saw yesterday that biosecurity, it's not a secretive little sport we play. We're all really happy to share what we know. So while we don't necessarily here in New Zealand have any response plans currently, we're still building our knowledge. We can look offshore to see what they're doing and to see if what they're doing is something that we could easily adapt here in New Zealand if we found ourselves in that response. So the California and the Washington response plans, they're two really good plans to look at. And they're really concerned because A, the risk is higher. It's just on the east coast, so it's a lot quicker to get to them. But they also grow 80% of the grapes in the USA. So you can imagine if they got spotted lanternfly, that could have some really significant problems. Really simply, if you look across all three of these plans, there's kind of three foundational areas or priority areas that we're going to look at today as well. So the first one is detection, then it's management, and then they have a real strong focus on awareness and outreach. So Simon touched on this. There's no pheromone traps for spotted lanternfly. We've got no way to draw it to an area to be able to find it. So visual detection is really the key way. There are some traps on the right there, but they're a point in time. So they're sticky bands, they wrap them around trees, and the nymphs crawl up to fly or to hop away. But no, that's a single tree that you're getting a view on, and that's not necessarily saying then that you have that, because it could be in the environment. So that visual detection for eggs and adults is in those response plans is a key way in which they're hoping to get detection early. And detection is really essential for all response activities. So you need to be able to detect it early, you need to be able to delimit the population, and you need to know where it is to be able to put those managements in place. So it means that detection will likely be quite a resource-heavy part of a response, because it's about people. People only have 2 eyes, so we need a lot of eyes, so we'll need a lot of people out there looking. And again, in low population densities, looking for that sooty mould is a real key way that they see if they can find the spotted lanternfly as well. Management, situationally dependent, depends on the time of year, the life stage, what environment you're operating in. But the main methods they use is contact insecticides. So especially for the adults, you really need to get a lot on an adult to take it out. It's quite a big beast, and it has this natural behaviour that if it gets disturbed, it just hops away. So while it's useful, it is still really difficult to control. herbicides, so you can take out host plants. We won't take out the grapes, Sophie, I promise. But if we have host plants that they really love, there is an opportunity to remove those so that that they're not there. Trapping I've talked about. If you've got the egg stage, I talked about that coat that goes over it that makes it super hard for chemicals to infiltrate. So egg mass scraping is pretty much the way they manage that life stage. So again, people out there scraping eggs off these surfaces to take them out. And then boundary treatment, so they treat the borders of orchards or places to try stop it. So lastly, I just wanted to touch on outreach because this is kind of really essential to all their plans. And part of that is that it's really easy to recognise. The adult itself is really big and it's got these beautiful wings. The nymphs are brightly coloured and they're often in large numbers. So people can report it pretty easily, and if they see it, it usually kind of triggers that this is something unusual. Maybe we should report it. They do it really well in the States, so they kind of do twofold. So the first one is awareness about detection and reporting, and then the second one, they've really done these great call to action. So they're getting people out there doing a lot of the work for them where they can. So they have these traditional methods, going door to door and knocking, similar to what we would do probably for a fruit fly here in New Zealand, and putting up these quite official signs in areas where it might be. But they also have some really cool ways, and they're harnessing social media and all these other channels to get the message out. So instead of Easter egg hunts, they're doing spotted lantern egg fly hunts where you can squish and scrape them and then have a bonfire and a pint. There's lots of TikToks, so everyone's getting the message out through TikToks. They've got dances and costumes. The one on the bottom right, that's kind of a play on a really key historical event, but instead of the first invasion by the English, it's the second invasion by spotted lanternfly, and calling people to do their duty. And these are just a few more. Again, that middle one is probably my favourite. So that's a group of school kids in a butterfly garden. They've painted their own one to say, this isn't a butterfly, this is a spotted lanternfly, please report it. So they're getting all ages in amongst this. And Valentine's Day, spotted lanternfly happens to be mating, so love is in the air. But they do really amazing awareness to get that message out, which is, I think, pretty cool and something we can learn from. So the key takeaways is the risk is low, but we are preparing. We're undertaking research and projects to build our knowledge and our tools in this peacetime. We heard from Jess this morning as well, but we have a GIA framework, so if that risk changes, we have that ability to quickly build momentum and start doing these things. And then the things that we might do are learnings that we can take offshore. That visual detection is pivotal. We'll have a really resource-heavy response in the early stages of spotted lanternfly, likely. Cultural management is key. A lot of those managements, again, rely on people getting out there doing them, scraping the eggs off your posts or off power lines. And then the last one is that awareness is foundational. So that is pretty much a lot of their focus, and if you don't have the awareness, people aren't looking, people aren't reporting, and we won't be able to stay ahead of the trend. So yes, that is Spotted Lanternfly 101 and what we might do, and I'll hand back to Leanne.
Thanks, Erin. That was a fantastic summary of spotted lanternfly. Great to hear that is a low likelihood that it will enter New Zealand, but obviously high risk if it does. The kiwi fruit industry wouldn't be in this by ourselves, would be in it with other horticultural partners and Biosecurity New Zealand, so strength through collaboration again. We do have time for a couple of questions, if there is any for Simon or Erin for their presentations. Lisa.
There are quite a few questions on Slido. I'll start with some of the first ones, which is, Simon, what are people doing to get rid of the honeydew and or sooty mould? If spotted lanternfly can't be controlled, can we remove the honeydew?
Well, we've been trying that in New Zealand for quite some time with passion vine hopper with very little success. So, in the States, in terms of agriculture, no, there's nothing they're doing. They're trying to control it before it gets to that stage.
Both kiwi fruit and spotted lanternfly originated from China. How do kiwi fruit in China, wild and cultivated, cope with spotted lanternfly, and can we learn anything from this?
Good question. We're still learning from China what they do. So it isn't, because it grew up together, it isn't such a significant problem. It's kind of, they just manage it with their daily on-orchard management. But we're doing that work that I talked about, and we have some ZGS partners as well that we can learn from. So that's kind of our next cab off the rank to understand what's going on there. And in wild kiwi fruit, I'm afraid I don't know.
And in domestic kiwi fruit, the Chinese tend to bag the fruit while it's growing, so it's actually growing inside a protective cover, so there isn't an issue from sooty mould, which is why it's not reported as an issue, because they actually bag the fruit. So, yeah, I don't think we quite want to get to that stage in New Zealand of putting bags over every bit of fruit, but yeah.
Hi, Elaine here. I've just got a question. I don't know who it's going to be relevant to, by the way, so you can choose. But it's about the silvering that you get on the leaf with the honeydew. Is any research going on to use, say, satellite imaging or any kind of spectral imaging to use that as an early form of detection?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of, and I don't know that you'd see it from satellite because it would tend to be on the ground underneath our plant, so it would be the bottom layers that you see it on, because obviously it's got to fall down, so I don't know if you'd see it from satellite just simply because of the leaf cover above it, and the leaf cover above it didn't have any sign, it was underneath.
From the perspective of awareness, probably the most likely port energy is going to be the port, and there was mention of stevedores being, trained, etc., but there's other industries around the port, like containers. There's a big container industry. Is there a push there to, make them aware of how likely this could be a problem?
Yeah, not specifically the container ports, but we would hope that the tight links that the port has with a lot of their partner companies, that message could be getting out. But that's a great opportunity to kind of outreach a little bit wider from the specific port to do that as well. So that's a good point, and we can take that on board. Oh, there is.
Aside from the quality impacts, any export impacts? Is it a quarantine pest for any of our trading partners?
No, not that we know of, no market access issues. The export issues will be that we can't export fruit with sooty mould, so that will be where it comes. But the eggs, they often lay on flat surfaces. It's not a huge layer on eggs on fruit or anything like that, so it won't have shouldn't have a market access issue at that stage.
Another question on Slido relates to pheromone traps. Do we know if there are any being developed?
They've looked into it lots, so nope, there are none developed at the moment, but they are recently found in the States that they have a strong affinity for power lines, so they're starting to look into the vibration of power lines to understand how that attracts spotted lanternfly to an area. They've worked on a lot of kind of chemicals and attractants as well, that from the Tree of Heaven, one of their favourite hosts, to see if that can be used to draw it to an area, but to date they've had no real success.
No, the main way, as Erin said, was the sticky banding traps and just relying on them, walking up past them. So for those of us that have been in the industry for a long time, you'll remember the banding that we did for Fuller's Rose Weevil and how much we enjoyed that, and that's exactly what we'd be back to, is probably putting sticky bands on everything, because that's what they like to do, is just crawl up structures.
More questions, Lisa?
If we have time for another one, is eradication a viable option still for the US, and what would a management strategy look like instead?
No, you saw from my picture just how widespread this thing is in the States now, and the issues that they have with managing on people's properties, that it's well and truly gone from any chance of eradication, so it is very much long-term management.
Okay. Thank you very much, Simon and Erin, for your presentations. Next, I'd like to introduce Angus Mackay, who's the Assistant Commissioner of Compliance and Response from MPI. Angus brings a wealth of experience from being in response. He was MPI's Chief Controller, Manager of the Response Group, and now is Assistant Commissioner. I'll hand over to Angus, who'll take us through our practical exercises today as our Response Controller. Thanks, Angus.
Thanks, Leanne. Morning, everybody. Kia ora koutou, nā mai, haere mai. Welcome to Exercise, Beauty or a Beast. I'm not sure whether that's a reference to me. So I'm now putting on my controller jacket and changing persona a little bit. So I don't really like these jackets, but I've got to say the whole purpose of Sims and a response is about bringing order from chaos. So thanks to KiwiNet, the 60 people in this room, you're now my IMT. So this is quite usual. A whole bunch of people get dumped into a room and you're all going, what the hell am I doing here? How does this work? How does this new Sims system that I might have done a half-day course 2 years ago, how does that work? So the controller's job is really about making sure that everybody in this room knows what they're doing, and if they don't know, they know who to ask. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to do the initial controller's briefing. So in Sims, there's a thing called GSMIAC, which is the briefing tool. So there's lots of briefing tools, it's just they're all the same pretty much, but GSMIAC is the one that is in the Sims manual. So at the end of this briefing, everybody should know what they're doing, that's the purpose of it. So yeah, we'll crack on. So welcome everyone to the Spotted Lanternfly response. We've just had that excellent 101 on what the Spotted Lanternfly is, so we all know what it is. So I'll explain the ground. So the kiwi fruit orchard where spotted lanternfly was detected is Cottlevale Orchard, and that's a 5.06 hectare kiwi fruit orchard. So there will be some information on the tables, Erin? Yeah, okay. So you don't need to take too many notes. The orchard headquarters are located at 84A Hughes Road in the Bay of Plenty region. 4.5 hectares is planted in the Hayward variety and 0.56 hectares is planted in the G3 variety. The area surrounding Cottlevale Orchard is populated with fruit orchards and agricultural operations. Rangiora Road is the main road for these operations. There's been a lack of rain in the area within the last week, though the rain is forecast today. However, ground conditions are currently stable and will not affect response operations unless spraying is a priority. Temperatures have been consistent over the past week with highs of 14 and 15 and lows of 5 to 7. As it's winter season, there's minimal activity on the orchard. There will be some workers present, pruning the last of the vines and applying bud break sprays. There are no organic considerations for this orchard. So that's the G, that's the ground, so you've got an idea now where we are and what we're dealing with. So the situation is that last Friday on the 2nd of August, KVH received a call from a concerned kiwi fruit orchard manager regarding the presence of egg masses on his orchard structures at Cottlevale Orchard. That afternoon, a KVH rep visited the site and collected a sample, and it was sent to the MPI Plant and Environment Lab in Auckland for ID. Formal ID was confirmed as spotted lanternfly, and there's a Latin name which I will hopelessly pronounce, so I won't bother. At 12 o'clock on the Tuesday, and yesterday on the Wednesday, a response was stood up to manage this incursion. Movement controls were implemented to contain the incursion and prevent further spread. Yesterday, a governance meeting was held to develop the response objectives, and these have been approved this morning. The orchard manager is willing and able to support Biosecurity New Zealand where he can, and this should be accommodated where it is practical to do so. The entry pathway of spotted lanternfly is currently unknown. So we've got the ground, we know where it is, we've got the situation, we know what's going on. Okay, the mission. So our mission is to minimise the impacts of spotted lanternfly on the New Zealand horticulture industry and wider public. So I repeat, our mission is to minimise the impacts of the spotted lanternfly on the New Zealand horticulture industry and wider public. So do you understand that? So we're clear, command and control. This comes from the military, you say the mission, it's really short and brief, you repeat it. So we should have that up on the wall, that's what we're doing, okay? So we're going to do this by determining the extent of spotted lanternfly, spread within kiwi fruit orchards and the wider Bay of Plenty. And we're going to limit the spread of spotted lanternfly. We're also going to keep our options open, and we're going to consider whether we can do eradication for this. So execution. So this is the key bit. So by now you probably all have been divided up into the various teams, intel, planning and that. So I'm now going to tell each of those functions what I expect them to do. So we're only going to do 3 just for time. So what everybody should be doing in a really good response, everybody's talking to each other. So if you walk into a response room and it's absolutely quiet, you know something's wrong. If there's a hubbub of noise and generated and you get the vibe, you know that it's working well. So before you commence any activities today, you need to do the I am safe assessment. So that'll be out on your tables as well. So all those people who went out and drank too much last night, you need to declare that to your manager. You know, responses are a different high-stress environment, so they are different from BAU, and we don't want anyone to be feeling unwell or not comfortable in the environment. So by 1600 hours today, the following tasks will be completed and will be with me for final approval before dissemination outside of this incident management team. So in a response, if I say 4 o'clock, I mean 4 o'clock. I don't mean 4:05. I don't mean we're not going to bother chasing it up. It's 4 o'clock. That's when it's going to go out. Because there's a whole load of things that cascade on from some of these actions. So if we don't do sit-reps when we're intending to do them, if we don't hold meetings bang on the time, everything else falls out of whack. So I'm going to just do some taskings by functional team. So what I normally do is I will get the person who's the manager of that function to stand up, because what I'm doing is I'm delegating responsibility and I'm providing clarity from chaos. So if you want to know who the intel manager is, there's a person there with a vest on. So intel's blue. There you are, Matt. You're the intel manager. So if you just stand up. So here we go. Here's the intel manager. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm the intel manager.
Yep, there we go. So you know now that he's the guy. All right? You can sit down now. Thanks. So tasks for intel. So I need a common operating picture. So the main focus for intel is situational awareness. Because if we don't know what's going on and we can't tell people, we can't deal with it. And I need a map. So you wouldn't believe how difficult it is sometimes to get a map put on a wall. So the Cyclone Gabriel, I had a whiteboard and I had to draw a square on it with map. And it took about 3 weeks for them to put a map on the board. In the end, I just printed one off Google Maps and stuck it on there as an embarrassment, honestly. Second thing, I need a pestilum analysis to further analyse the implications of the response. So we'll talk a little bit about pestilum in a minute. I need you to investigate possible entry pathways to mitigate any further spread. And I need you to work with the Public Information Management team to prepare briefings for appropriate stakeholders. So Intel hold all the knowledge. They should be providing information and intelligence to the other functions. Consider what further movement and area controls under the Biosecurity Act are required to slow the spread. Disseminate situational information as needed by the IMT. So if anyone wants to know what's going on, they should go to Intel. Intel should be the single source of the truth. So if anyone walks in this room and wants to know what's going on, there should be something on the wall that is up to date that tells them, but they should go to Intel. And I want a sit rep by 4 o'clock. So all you other functions, you need to have your status report into these guys by 3 o'clock. So this is why Intel needs to be around everybody finding out what's going on. Okay, is that understood?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, we'll move on to logistics. Who wants to be a logistics manager? There you go. You looked away, so you can put it on. So stand up, tell everyone who you are. Yeah, cool. All right. So we know who logistics are. So I forgot to say intelligence is the most important function in the room. I'm now going to say logistics is the most important function in the room. especially when it comes to catering. So logistics, what I want is a daily calendar to define the rhythm of the response. And I want that up on the wall so everyone can see what we're doing today. And I want 2 IMT meetings a day. So the controller will set the pace of the response. Usually pretty much the same. What can happen though is the whole day is full of meetings for the controller. So the controller will never get out. So we've got to stop doing that. I have got loads of examples, by the way. I'll do the briefing, but if you have questions, please ask. I want you to determine the requirements of this room, and if they're not up to standard, I need you to sort out the logistics. So have we got Wi-Fi? Have we got screens? Have we got laptops? Determine the resource needs for the response and begin sourcing and inducting them. So resourcing is number one priority, and it takes an awful lot of people to get this many people into a room. So never underestimate how many people you need to start staffing things. Provide food, vehicles, accommodation as required, and also make sure we have the correct financial approvals and record keeping. Cannot overestimate how important it is to record what you're doing. Okay, is that understood? Cool. Public information management. Who wants a purple vest? There you go, you looked at me. So stand up, tell everyone who you are. Public information manager. Cool, there we go, all right. So tasks for you, I need you to identify the response stakeholders and keep like a network of that, and consider what's already in place. So with all these things, we've probably got plans in place, so have a look at those. And I want you to develop a plan of how we engage with all those stakeholders. We need some key messages and talking points so that we can disseminate them to national growers and agriculture stakeholders. And I need a media release by 4 o'clock. Okay. All right, so you get the idea. We carry on doing that until all the functions know what they're doing, and at the end of it is like, does everyone understand what they're doing? Yeah, good. Okay, we move on to admin and logistics. So this response is being run under the Biosecurity Act. The spot on Lanternfly is an unwanted organism. Catering is provided, and the logistics function will provide a briefing about the timings of the day and to enjoy the nice food that they organise. So take breaks as you need them. If you have any concerns, talk to your manager first or talk to the controller. We're going to be working closely with the auditor manager, workers, KVH, and the treatment providers. So this is a collective effort by everybody to sort out this response. We're going to use KiwiNet to identify the resources. You've already got this excellent system, so that's what we're going to try and use. And we're going to need a lot of people. And again, consider what plans we've already got in place. Because worst thing to do is start a response and forget that we've already thought about all this stuff. Command and communications. So I'll be a controller for a response. Function leads will report to me. Everyone else, please report to your function leads if you have any queries. Our technical advisory group has been established, and if you have any questions for them, that's been run through intelligence. Governance are to receive daily sit reps at 4 p.m. For the remainder of the week, planning will do an initial action plan to be ready by 4 p.m. And then we'll decide on the frequency of that as we move forward. All external communications are to be approved by me. So you have to have a gatekeeper for stuff that's going out just to fact check it all. And the spokesperson for this response is Leanne. There we go. So that's the briefing. Any questions? Does anyone not know what they're doing? Good. Okay. Okay. Start work. Team managers meet with your teams, explain, divvy up your tasks. We will meet again at, 12 o'clock. Okay. So now is where all the work starts, and I can go and have a cup of tea. Yeah. All right. Any questions about GSMIAC? Any questions about the role of the controller? No, you've all done this before. Cool. So I think what we're going to do now is move on to the first exercise. Yeah. So I mentioned Pestilum in the briefing. So that's it's another tool, and it's to look at the wider implications of a response. So what you might do at the start of a response is basically brainstorm all the things that could impact this spotted lanternfly. Usually, the more senior people are in an organisation, they kind of do this automatically because they're already dealing politically, economically, and they've got the idea of this. But this is a real structured way to go through it and go, oh, what else do we need to think about? Have we got the social licence for this? Have we got the money for this? Is this going to impact something that we haven't even thought about? Sorry. So, lost my notes. There we go. So, you know, examples of this are you might have something which you think is just this just affects one small industry, but actually, when you have a look at it, the economic impacts are something far bigger than that. Or technological. So, you know, the use of satellites, we've seen that yesterday. Is there something that we could be doing that's actually a lot smarter than what we're actually proposing at the time? It's a really useful exercise, and it should inform your first action plan as well. So I think I'm going to hand over to Erin. Cool.
Stay up. Thanks, Angus. So he did a great job at setting that scene for us, so understanding what the different roles and responsibilities are amongst the functions, and he introduced Pestilum. So our first exercise today is we're going to be wearing the blue vest. We're all going to be intelligence, and we're going to be undertaking our own Pestilum exercise. So Pestilum is a way that you can check the environment you're operating in. You're always, every time something comes in, it's never going to be the same scenario as a time before. So you need to take a step back to be able to have a look at the big picture to make sure that any of the decisions you're making in a response are going to be effective or most effective and are successful. So Pestilum stands for political influences, economic influences, social influences, technological influences, environmental, legal, organisational and media. So those are kind of the key areas that we want to look at to see what's going on in that environment at the time and what that might mean. So the way we do that, and everyone has a template on their table, the way that we do that is we have under these influences, we've laid it out, we have the fact. So that's pretty much what's happening in that area. So in a political arena, what's happening at the time, what's the government policy of the day, and it's just simply information. From that fact, you then do this deduction. So that's the so what. So what does this fact actually mean? You know, what could it mean? And then this last one is the implication, and this is the key part for the response, and that's we call it the now what. So from this deduction, what actions or decisions within that response need to be made to make sure we're adapting to that influence. So there's an example down the bottom of circa 2019, 2020 COVID. If you have a look at this one, the fact is that in the political arena, the government's recently imposed strict movement controls and social distancing requirements, and movement permits are required to move in and out of regions. So that's simply a fact. That's what's happening. That's the information of the day. We then move to the deduction. So what does this actually mean? So this could mean that we have limitations to access. So movement restrictions could hinder the ability of response teams to move around. and it could lead into delays in undertaking the response activities to meet these requirements. Resource allocation as well, we need to adhere to social distancing and other protocols, so it means we can't mobilise the personnel. So that's taking the fact, what's happening, getting some, what it means, and then the last bit is that implication. So what do we need to do in the response to help manage this? So for this one, it could be that we need to have some really robust and quick coordination between MPI and the Ministry of Health to rapidly build the requirements and the procedures needed to get the response moving around quickly. Another one could be clear communication. So we need to make sure that all our response staff are safe out there working in this environment. So we need to make sure we've got clear comms coming from the response to those people who are down on the ground, making sure that they're adhering to the requirements. So you can imagine if you didn't take a step back and do this, that if there were movement restrictions and social distancing and you just went out and did a response like you usually would, you wouldn't be able to undertake that. So taking that time to step back and see what's going on in the environment is really key. So at our tables, I mentioned we have templates. So what we've done is we've done a bit of starter for 10 and filled out the facts for you to give you the environment that this response is currently operating in. As a table, take a read of those facts and select a few and try and do that deduction and implication. So what does that fact actually mean, and then what implication could this have for the response? What actions or changes could we make that will help us be able to respond and make decisions better? So we have a couple minutes. So we've got people roaming around the room. If there's any questions or you need some help kicking off and getting the idea, just look around, raise your hand, and we'll happily pop around. 10 minutes about to get it done. So don't expect you to do them all. Have a look and see how you go. Clear as mud. Thanks, guys.
It's been a good exercise to get you thinking about some of these broader influences. So we might just, I don't actually have a template in front of me, but we might just quickly go through and hear what people had. So for the political, maybe Lucy, if you could just, here, what's our facts? So, sorry, social, environmental, legal, political, okay. Local body elections are being held in the region. Did your table have anything for that one?
Thank you. Our deduction was that there could be higher political visibility and inspection. Do you want the implication? PIM will need to be higher involved, and there should be higher leadership involvement, or could be higher leadership involvement.
Perfect, thanks Lucy. Did everyone have something similar? Anyone had anything different for that first one? Okay, so the other one, government departments, including MPI, have recently undergone significant resource and budget cuts. Erin, which table are you picking on for that one?
Right here. Oh, no, not here. Who did it? Raise a hand. Did you guys? Here we go.
Limited resources, staff availability, are controllers still available? And then implications, asking government MPI to back response. Industry may have to take up some of those key positions.
Yeah, perfect. So that's where, industry resourcing into response could become more critical, and through things like KiwiNet. So that's great. Anyone have anything different for that one? No, economic. Kiwifruit industry has encountered multiple challenging seasons, leading to persistently low returns for orchards. Many in the industry are still in the process of recovery. Okay, Anna.
Okay, so the first, what we came up was with low morale and mental health for growers, been in previous responses such as PSA, would be first on their mind, possibly low engagement or avoidance, and panic and poor decision making. So we thought that the best implication for that would be to set up communications and mental health plans in place, so using the welfare structure and industry knowledge to do that. And then for the second part, the spotted lanternfly poses a significant threat to commercial crops. It was dealing with bordering host species, this is the so what, require larger control areas, stakeholder information management. We had pressure on supply chains, and the biggest one was cost to industry, who pays. So for that, it was our implications were GIA OA development. Basically, is the first step, and then once again, it goes down to communications and making sure that we have things like permits in place for the supply chain.
Cool, thank you. So yeah, with that first one, a biosecurity response, it's always going to be a very tough time for affected individuals, but particularly so if they're already in a high stress environment, going through a few tough years, the financials aren't looking good, and then this is another something they have to deal with. So that welfare support is going to be really critical. Angus, any comments on your experience in that space?
I think the thing that we're all dealing with at the moment is social license, and coming out of COVID, there's a lot more misinformation and disinformation out there. So everything we do, we've got to take people on the journey with us. So by and large, everyone wants to keep New Zealand green, clean, and a thriving economy. But we just have to remember that we have to tell the story to people and actually bring them along, rather than just going, hey, you can't go in this place, we're shutting it all down. Because if we do that, we'll get the huge backlash that we do. Just from a political point of view, you'd be amazed what kind of operational detail gets discussed at a political level. The more that the controller can do to provide assurance that we've got this, we're dealing with it, everything is good, and provide really clear information and intelligence, the more likely they are to go, cool, I'll move on to the next problem, you guys know what you're doing, carry on with it. And then the kind of resourcing, the changes, the cost-cutting kind of things, that there are fewer staff in response, but it is kind of one of our primary activities. Across MPI, there's been a big growth in the response capability, so other teams have got a lot more people in response, and we work across that. So, for example, next week we're doing a fruit fly exercise with Agriculture and Investment Services, Fisheries, all these other people who've got hundreds of people who do response. So it's not just biosecurity sitting here on our own. But the pressure on finance is always there. So with a biosecurity response, if we use our powers, we open up compensation, and we've got to take that into account right at the beginning because it costs a lot of money.
Thanks, Angus. Always good to get real-life response insights. So, social. There's tables down the back. Hopefully, your turn. Hopefully, you got this far. So, the first fact, there's a large population of RSE scheme workers in the community. What's your deduction and implication for this one?
So, our deduction was that there's potential loss of work for our RSEs, and our implication was one option is to work with government to see if we can redeploy them into other industries to continue work, or an alternative is look at how we can include them in the response.
Perfect. That's good. Thank you. Anything else on that one?
We just talked about the public perception for those workers as well, and there's a possible negative connotations around perceptions that they might have been the importers of the risk and things like that. So that would need a good comms plan to make sure that they weren't being discriminated against and supported in their work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
Yeah, and we also, I don't really know much about it, but in terms of these RSEs as sort of their permissions and what sort of work they can do, you sort of might need to coordinate with other government agencies to be able to have them permitted to actually do these activities that we're looking them to do.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Rebecca?
Yeah, so we also noted they're probably multilingual, so we'll need some translators, some good comms out to them, both for the key messaging to them and then out further beyond that.
Absolutely. Great point. I think we've got time for one more. So there's a World Series triathlon taking place next weekend in Papamoa East, and the expressway and Te Puke roads are being closed and used for the cycling portion. Rebecca, you've got the microphone. What do you think about this one?
So we thought there was a couple of opportunities here. You could raise awareness a little bit like in the cricket, to sort of put flyers out, raise awareness of the issue that's going on. Could be the benefit of less people travelling on the road, so less chance of hitchhikers, but then also more people in the area could cause challenges. So it's just, we thought all around managing that expectation and people movement within the area.
Perfect. Okay. Who haven't? Well, maybe the table down the back. Did you get to the technological one? Did you get that far? No. Okay, that's all right. How about the group at the front? Did you get to technological?
We've got 5 words on the page. So we've run out of resources in terms of diagnostic capacity, so I guess we need to identify whether there's an ability to store samples, like backlog samples, and perhaps prioritise which samples, some sort of priority ranking if that's needed, and obviously look for additional lab space through other providers.
Perfect. Great contributions,
Bring on the
everyone.
Aussies.
Thank you. So hopefully that was really useful to just go through the exercise, and you can see that taking, half an hour or an hour at the start of a response, I mean, you want to get stuck into the activity, but by taking the time to actually sit down and step through some of this, can really broaden your thinking about what else is going on in the external environment.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks also to Angus and Erin for starting us off with these practical sessions this morning. We definitely heard from our controller what his expectations were, and I think that's really important because then everyone knows what the rhythm of the response will be, and it will just go much more effectively if we all do what we're told. Thanks for the pendulum exercise. I know it can be quite overwhelming when you first see it, but it is a fantastic tool to make sure we don't miss anything critical. We do have morning tea now for 20 minutes, so we'll come back at 22 and enjoy your break. Thank you.
So the second exercise we're going to do is around PIM. So in my experience for a controller, the most important thing is communication. So if you don't tell people what you're doing, people think you're doing nothing. And a really good example of that is I went to help out in the floods in Otago, and they had a really great PIM, and she wrote a piece saying what a great job they'd done. And I thought, that's kind of an interesting way of doing it, telling everyone how great you are. And then the next day, the Otago Daily Times printed it verbatim. So everyone thought, what a great job they'd done. So, I wouldn't say journalists are lazy, but if you provide them with some quality information, they'll put it in the paper or stuff or whatever. Another example, so I ran the floods in Southland in 2020, which was a really big response. I was up at 5 o'clock every morning doing the morning TV and radio, and then finishing about 8 o'clock at night doing the afternoon stuff. So real pain in the backside, but actually that's the job. You've got to tell people what you're doing. You've got to provide that key messaging, a reassurance, warnings, and instructions if that's what you want to do. But PIM is absolutely the most important person in the room. So if you're not getting what you want from your PIM people, you need to have a conversation or find somebody else to do it. A really good PIM is invaluable. So the quality of information they'll put out, and also providing you the reactive lines. So everybody who's going to be talking about this, and that could be the controller, the spokesperson, governance, actually knows what we're doing and has some back pocket notes. So PIM's really important. So the next part of the exercise is around, there's a lot of overseas information around spotted lanternfly, a lot of collateral around awareness, detecting and reporting spotted lanternfly. So what are we going to do when we get our response? And it says in my notes now, hand over to probably Erin.
Thanks, Angus. So pretty much we're going to put our PIM hat on now. And as he mentioned, and we saw in those overseas plans, that awareness, that outreach, that education is really foundational to a lot of spotted lanternfly readiness and response. So what we're going to do as a table, we've got some flip charts hanging over seats, we've got some pens on the table, and we're simply going to go through and answer these 4 questions as a table with our PIM hat on, bringing our experience from the industry and wider about who do we need to reach, what those key messages might be. We have some fact sheets on the table as well with some information about spotted lanternfly. How do we get that message out? What channels might we want to use? And then the last one is how might we have prepared in advance, and that feeds also into what we can take away as KVH and start preparing as well. So we'll have about 10-ish to 15 minutes to go through these questions at your table, and then we'll come up and we'll feed back and see what we've got going on. Awesome, thank you.
So we'll go for the first one. Who do we need to reach? So Finn, it's either talk about it or dance. It's up to you. And stand up, please.
Okay, who we need to reach? We've got great people, but in my GIA hat, I would say NZ Wine Growers. But yeah, basically everyone. So all stakeholders involved, including industry, general public, iwi, ports and any other entry points, transport carriers and companies, the race organiser for the triathlon that's happening, reaching out to schools to get education amongst all the kids, and definitely garden centres and landscapers.
Don't dance, okay. Save that for later. So anyone have anything different?
We just said governance, like councils, etc.
Yeah. People are volunteering, what's going on? Oh, come on. Can you read your writing?
I can barely read my writing. I do my best. We also have market and market access related issues. They will need to be informed as well as the whole supply chain.
Yeah. Cool.
If that hasn't been said already.
So really wide scope of people you need to talk to, and Finn's right, it's everybody, but that's probably not helpful. So the question for you guys is, what have you already done in this space? What stakeholder mapping have you got? What comms plans have you already got in place? Because if you haven't got one, you need to do one. As much as you think you've hit the mark, you will have missed people off. And you've just got to do more and more and more of this stuff. So who do I need to reach? So senior leaders, I've got to give them the confidence we know what we're doing. Politicians, I've got to make them look good in front of the media. GIA partners, iwi, local mayors, local councillors, they'll all want to have a piece of this. Community groups, everybody and anybody really. But you've got to be quite structured about it, and you might have to tailor your messaging in different ways for different people. So there's a lot of work goes in here, but there's an awful lot of this that you know what a spotted lanternfly is going to be like, so you can do a lot of this work now. So that's around having a plan and actually getting it out and reading it when there's a response. All good with that one? Jamie, do you want to?
I was just wondering, do you have an initial media release?
Yeah. So a lot of the time in a new response, the best thing to do is put something out to say, hey, we're doing something about this. This is the person you need to contact if you want more info. but we will tell you what we're doing on a regular basis, because otherwise every person in this room will be getting a phone call from a different person going, are you doing anything? Did you know there was a spotted lanternfly? What are you doing about it? So this is what I mean. You've got to get in front of that media curve, and you've got to tell people that you're doing something about it. And be honest. So we're in the really early stages of this. We've set up a response with 60 people. We're looking at all our options. You know, that might be your first media release. Don't promise stuff you're not doing. Don't make stuff up. Be honest. Have a really good spokesperson who's confident enough when the media start asking stupid questions, you can go, you know, I don't know, we'll come back to you, whatever. It's quite an art form. When I take this off, I won't talk to anyone, I'm really shy. But when I put the vest on, you become a controller. So you've got to stand in front of people and you've got to perform. If you're not comfortable doing that, either practice or get somebody else to do it. Yeah. Cool. Next one. What are our key messages? Who haven't I picked on? Mike's table. But not Mike, someone who has not spoken. What are our key messages?
Oh, Angus, you've got no idea. Why are we going to be doing what we're doing? We're looking to protect our way of life. I can't read half these words, mate. We're going to be emphasising the importance of reporting, that we need people to be our eyes. We need early detection.
Yeah. Yeah, for this response, you want... So all responses are the same. We get a report, we find out where it is, we try and stop it spreading, we try and kill it, we try and find some form of long-term management if we can't kill it. They're all the same, pretty much. You know, you just insert the name of a different virus or pest or whatever it is.
I think the messiest part was our first point was on just the importance of the of dealing with the pest. You know, the devastating impact that it will have, not just for industry but the sort of public nuisance as well.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. You've got to be careful with that though, because if you make this out to be the worst pest that's ever entered the land, you're going to get a lot of attention. And you're going to get a lot of people demanding that you eradicate it. So really balanced, you know, like the 101 we had there, that was a really good, you know, balanced session. It's a real pain. We don't want it. It's going to have lots of impacts. But also, when you put that out there, let's give people a few solutions. So if you do find it, report it to this number or whatever. If you do find it, I don't know what the options are, but you can use your normal Roundup or, you know, spray it, do whatever. So give them a solution as well. Get them in, get citizen science, you know, get them involved in what we're doing. Anyone else with any other key messages?
The only other one sort of to raise on it is that it's not a health risk.
Yeah.
Seen that one in the past.
Yeah. And that's about wrapping this up in a package that people will understand, so that your general public who think, all right, I don't actually need to worry about this too much until it's all over my doorstep. You know, be really clear about what the problem is and the scope. Any other key messages? Yep.
We thought you could put a little bit about what people might expect, like if they're going to be seeing traps around or if there's movement controls in place, because that gives confidence that there is actually a plan that's being followed as well. And it lets them know not to panic if they see that, I guess.
Yeah, and really, you know, a really good way of doing that is getting the media into your IMT or get them to go out and see what you're doing. You know, they like nothing more than that because it's 5 minutes of easy telly. So as much as you can, be kind of open. You know, my kind of philosophy is everything should be in the public knowledge unless there's a really good reason not to. And some stuff is sensitive and you can't talk about it. but actually, why do we keep things so secret sometimes? It's a mindset thing. Cool. How do we get the message out? How about this table at the front?
How do we get the message out? We thought there should be daily briefings, probably at a national level. We had via our industry representatives, whether that's Zespri, KVH, post-harvest, the more the better. Social media to create awareness, and also essentially make use of our KiwiNet people.
We've got here physical signage, so on the back of buses, place cards, mail drop, door knocking, and town hall online, so involving our industry or our local people, and churches, so doing presentations at churches.
So communities are, you say we'll talk to the community, it means a different thing to everybody, but there's also communities of practice, so certain school groups or religious groups, or it's endless. Back to Finn's thing, we do everything. Yep. Anyone else? How do we get the message out? So again, there's no single answer to this. Depends where your response is. If it's in a rural area that's got a local marae or whatever, you're going to be engaging with that. If it's in an urban area, different format. Community meetings are great, but you've got to, don't just do a community meeting and have an idea whether it's going to be a real ding-dong or just an informational thing. So in Victoria last week, HPAI, avian influenza, they deliberately weren't doing community meetings because they had a suspicion that the animal activists might get involved. But what they were doing was putting up information stalls in markets and things like that. So a different approach for the same outcome. Yeah, and don't be surprised that you're not hitting everybody. Constantly review how you're getting the message out. And if you're getting feedback that people don't know what you're doing, then you need to change something. Yeah. Okay. How might we have prepared in advance? Which table's not spoken to me? How about this table here?
Who's got the hot?
Don't be shy.
So we had a number of things. Technical knowledge about identification and control. A host plants list, understanding what are the most susceptible. Checking the capability of diagnostic labs, making sure that that resource is available.
Yep.
And having a reporting process plan.
Yeah, very good. Is there another table that's not talked to me? Jessica, you haven't talked to me. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no. I'll pretend.
Just reading the notes here. Like review previous communication plans. Brief the stakeholders and have better plans to be rolled out in advance as well. So have that all ready for when we need them.
Yeah. So the key to any good response is existing trusted relationships. You can have a process, you can have as many plan documents as you like, but if you don't know who to ring up and actually have a really meaningful conversation with them, you're on behind the eight ball. So in the Southland floods, there was an awful lot going on all over Southland. We did the biggest aerial evacuation. We've evacuated 3 towns. There was an Elton John concert on. There was something else. It was a nightmare. So for me, I needed to know what was going on. So I just used to have somebody in each area, and I'd just ring them up and go, what's going on? Or I'd say, you're in charge, you do it. So having those pre-existing relationships was really important. So in MPI, if we've got a thing, we will have pre-prepared messages, either reactive or proactive. So our comms team are really good, and we've got suites of messages that we will, obviously they need a bit of a tweak depending on the scenario, but we're ready to go with most of them. Cool, I'm almost to time. So anything else from a PIM point of view? How many organisations here have a dedicated PIM? How many who aren't KVH have a dedicated PIM? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So you guys know the importance of it because you probably use it day to day in your commercial activities, and that's fine. PIM in a response is slightly different. What's really useful as well is having a network of PIMs. So, if your PIMs aren't talking to each other, they should be. And if they're not ready to help each other out in a response, they should be. They're a really powerful group of people. So, okay. Logistics, the most important function in a response. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next exercise, so logistics. So logistics is kind of, to my experience, it's always a little bit undercooked. If you're going to put your resources anywhere, put them into logistics because they will get you all the people you need, they'll get you food, they'll get stuff paid for, and they'll order things. So you've got to really get that done. Just one observation: if you've got a logistics function, make sure someone's got oversight on what's going on. Because what you don't want to find at the end of the week or the month or the response is that logistics has spent 5 times as much as you thought they would. And they're always trying to be helpful, but people will ask for the most stupid stuff. So I've been in countless responses where someone has rung up and gone, we need 5,000 of those little biscuits you get in motels. And it's like, why? And you have to start asking the questions. Another good example is satellite phones. So in the Kaikoura quake, we kept getting asked for satellite phones for a particular community that was isolated, and we must have sent them 3 satellite phones. And they just kept coming back and saying, these aren't working. And eventually I twigged and I went, has anyone actually told them how they work? And they were standing inside a room like this trying to use a satellite phone. So if you don't know that you have to be outside for a satellite phone to work. So it was just like, you've just got to check sometimes and have a bit of a sense check. What are we ordering this stuff for? So for the logistics, this is really the bread and butter of logistics. You're going to need a lot of people for this response. You've got your KiwiNet, and that might be a clue. How are you going to source people for this response? That's the question I always have at the beginning of every response we do. Where am I going to get the people to do this? Because I haven't got 60 people a day for 3 months. So we're always trying to find people. So here are the questions. So if you just want to work through these on your pieces of paper, and then after about 10 or 15 minutes, we'll pick on somebody else. Thank you. So first question, how could the kiwi fruit industry support this response? Who wants to go with that one? Oh, come on, don't be shy now. Oh, there we are, thanks.
Providing people through KiwiNet, providing local meeting rooms, using KVH's PIM function, Zespri, NZKGI, linking them in, utilising their communication network, utilising local growers looking at their own orchards, involving post-harvest extension networks, retailers networks, using crop monitors, using Kiwi Green and Evergreen networks to search orchards and upskill people, and utilising vehicle fleets, utilising plant and food research, as well as testing and lab functions through post-harvests.
Cool. Very comprehensive. Anyone got anything else?
Just we added to that the accommodation, because the seasonal worker accommodation might be free at that particular time, so people coming into the response, there's a place for them to go. And also access, because places aren't always easiest to get into, so, yeah.
For our areas where we haven't got post-harvest presence, we've also got our regional coordinators, KVH and also KGI, that operate in that space. And merchants, actually, we're reasonably well connected to farmlands, Hori Centre, all of those sorts of resources as well, with luck.
So there's an awful lot of capability you guys have got. I mean, it drives me mad sometimes that we set up a control room either in Wellington or wherever it is, and we all sit in that room and we do sims, and we do sims really great, and every day there's a sit rep at 4 o'clock and there's an action plan, and all the actual activities happening outside of that control room. So, you know, to me, if we get a response here, you know, I need to be using all your capability, because you do this day in, day out. This is your business. So we've got to engage with you. There was a comment earlier on about seasonal workers, and, you know, like the kiwi fruit industry's own staff. So we've got to make use of those in a response. We want to keep businesses going. We don't want to bring in a new contractor and it all gets a bit complicated, and actually the people who we want to keep in business, we don't use them. So over in Australia last week, they were definitely doing that. They were using all the chicken farm staff to do the work and paying them to do that. It might be that you might want to have a look at some of your employment contracts. So if you've got workers that you've employed to do a thing, is there a line in the job description that says, in an emergency, you're going to do anything we want you to do? So, you know, have a think about some of your contract stuff. You know, you talked about using vehicles. That's a really good example. Cyclone Gabriel, you know, MPI's fleet is moving to electric. So we've got away with all the diesel utes and we've got these little electric cars. So when there's no power for a week, what do? And all the little electric cars haven't got spare tyres either. So when you have a puncture and there's no cell phone coverage, what do? So if you've got a load of diesel utes, great. Yeah. And financial arrangements as well. So I don't know whether you've got this, but you know, like if you've got an idea how much you want to charge out your staff for in an emergency, or you might do it for free, who knows? You know, it's good to have that conversation up front before the emergency, so that if Farm A wants to provide staff to Farm B, there's an arrangement in place, or an understanding that it's, you know, next time Farm B will help Farm A. So some of this contractual stuff can get in the way of providing resources. Cool, we'll go to the number 2. So, as a KiwiNet member being deployed, sorry, I'll read it in here. What would I want to know? Thank you.
How long I'm going to be there for? Doing what? What to bring? Where am I staying? How am I getting there? Am I going to get paid? And what's the process? And are you going to feed me?
Yeah, really, all really valid questions that we forget about. You know, for me, as the controller, I just want bums on seats. I just want a load of capable people who can do stuff. I'd rather have 5 people who know what they're doing and can get on with it than 50 people who know how to fill out a form. So, but they're all really important questions. And the more we can do that in the logistics space before the response, we've got a really good induction package. You know, we know how we're going to pay people if we are. We know where we're going to put people, and we know how we're going to feed them. So I'll give you another example. Velvet Leaf in Southland, we went out for about 6 weeks to, had about 100 people a day going out and searching paddocks for velvet leaf, which is an invasive grass. After about a week, we broke all the catering providers because they just couldn't maintain that pace. So you've got to have not just one catering provider, you've got to have 3 or 4, and share the love around as well. Particularly if you're using a lot of helicopters, because they get really angsty if you don't use them So you've got to share that around as well.
The key thing I'd like to know, if I was being called up, is, and you've just mentioned it, is what training I'm going to get.
Yep.
There's nothing worse than going out and not really knowing what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that would be the key thing for me.
So you can do as much training as you like, but what you always got to bear in mind, you need some just-in-time training. So if you're going to have people doing surveillance, which you're always going to have that in a response, have you got a just-in-time training package that you can put in front of somebody at a youth meeting in the morning? And the really important thing is to concentrate all your effort on your leadership. So if you've got really good foremen, team managers, whatever you call them, concentrate your training on those, because they do this day to day. They run teams of people day to day. So tell them what you need them to do, and they can do it themselves. But you're right. You walk into a response room, most of the people won't have a clue what they're doing. So you've got to have that leadership that encourages them to ask questions, encourages them to actually think about stuff themselves. What's the task I actually want you to do? Not, I want you to fill these forms out. So it's kind of an approach thing, really.
We also had, kind of leading on from that, but who would you be reporting to and who you'd be working with, to make that clear to start with. What to do if approached by media, emergency contacts, but also on orchard bathroom facilities, because they're usually few and far between, but they're going to need to be provided.
Yeah, so health and safety, it's everybody's responsibility. If we're in a response, you've got multiple PCBUs, but it all comes back to the controller to make sure it's happening. And it all sounds, like, oh, we need some toilets. Of course you need some toilets. So you go back to your logistics team and you make sure you've got the right amount of resources for each property or whatever.
So just one other thing we want to mention is what they want to know is the expectations. You don't want people showing up on site that think they're going to be fronting one news every day when really you just want them to book cars. So those expectations are really important.
Yeah. So the general rule of thumb, if you get approached by media, tell them what you're doing, tell them what your little bit is, and if they start asking any questions, I don't know that, you need to talk to the boss in the office. But I'm here standing on this cordon stopping people coming into this site or whatever. And there's generally no problem with that. Yeah. So I've got to ask my boss a question. So Andrew, how might we have prepared in advance?
Thanks, Angus. I'll remember that at your performance discussion. Taking part in exercises like this, attending these types of things, I think there's an awful lot of lessons learned from previous experience for some people who might have been there, how you kind of share that amongst your teams, obviously around formed relationships across kind of the sector and things, people have been involved in things. The other thing that's always out there as well is around use the opportunity. There's current climate change and whatever going on, numerous adverse event scenarios and different things that people are involved in as well. They're the same principles around the response. A lot of the same processes, everything involved around that. So use those opportunities as well, gain some knowledge and experience from that, and then feed that back into your wider teams or network from there. So I guess some takeaways from me.
Excellent answer, thank you. Anyone else? How might we prepare in advance?
We just heard that you would have developed a lot of relationships in advance, especially like the industry organisation would have a lot of relationships developed in the local area with groups. You would have probably planned out your communications channels and a list of people that you need to contact. You could have developed some FAQs and potential answers that you can modify when you understand the context of the response. As Andrew said, regular SIMS training or simulation opportunities. Having a skills database for your volunteers could be a really good way to pre-prepare so you know what their strengths are and where they might be deployed. Induction materials pre-prepared by logistics. Checklists for the logistics team to make sure that they're not missing anything under pressure. Having a stock take of what response resources are available to be deployed with the volunteers. And then just processes for coordinating with the labs and sending in samples and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the more you can do before this, the better, stronger you're going to be. If you think about as well the training you're doing, because you might think you're doing loads of training if you're doing Sims training or whatever, but you might be pitching that always at the operational level, that people going out in the field. Have you trained your governance? Do they know what they're supposed to be doing? You know, usually not, and that's why we end up with governance trying to tell you which person to go to the farm or whatever. So you need to do that training across the board. And if you find, so my latest fridge magnet speech at the moment is useful, usable and used. If you're doing a load of work and it's not useful, usable and used, don't do it. You know, plans, the effort of preparing the plan is where all the value is. The plan itself, you know, it's going to be wrong when the thing happens, but it's getting all the right people in the room. So, yeah. And I guess as well, just think a bit out of the box. So, you know, there might be a load of resources that you don't even know about, and usually in a big response, people will come out of the woodwork. Just vet them a little bit. You know, companies are really good who are trying to sell a product. Hey, we've got this great whiz-bang thing that will sort all your problems out. It's just $1 million. So have a bit of, you know, some of it might be great. It might be the thing that will sort your problem out, so it might be worth $1 million. Or you might get groups coming to you and say, we'll do that for you. So a good example of that is the Rapid Relief Trust. So it's linked to the Brethren Church. Gosh, they've got some resources. And they'll just come and turn up with a caravan and cook you meals and do all that for a donation. So, you know, there's things that you never even thought about, but huge amount of resources out there. I think that's it.
Just a couple of comments.
Yeah, I'll just...
So thanks, that's really useful to get that insight on what sort of questions would be running through your mind if you were going into a response. So that can help us to both check that KiwiNet handbook and see if that information is there or what needs updating. Also that deployment email that we might send out, the sort of information that might be required. So yeah, really good. And the other one is, I mentioned we will do a workshop in December, and this gives us a few of the items that we can work through. In terms of training, we used to, when you know, things like fruit fly, there used to be trapper training in advance that could be called upon in a response. But more recently, it's been very much on-the-job training. So as long as you can turn up at the time that's required, so they're getting all the new people at the response at the same time for the induction, for the predetermined time, you get that on-the-job training. So if you don't know what you're doing, don't freak out. It's all part of the plan. So I hand over to Lan to wrap up, but that was great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Matt, Angus and Erin for that practical session. It's hopefully got all of you thinking about how you could be involved, and I'm sure the KVH team will be in touch to make sure that you're on a register so that we can call you up if something does happen. So just a few closing comments from me. Thank you very much for your attendance for yesterday and then also today. Thank you very much to our sponsors. So just a reminder, our sponsors were Plant and Food Research, Horti Centre Group, PGG Wrightson, Onside, Port of Tauranga, Zespri and the Ministry for Primary Industries. Can we please thank them? Thank you to all of our presenters and everyone who's participated in this exercise this morning. And then thank you very much to the KVH team who've worked behind the scenes for the past couple of months to get this up and running, and then also providing fantastic support over the last couple of days. So you will be receiving an email from Lisa after the symposium asking for some feedback. So we always try and improve these events every time we do run them. So please take a couple of minutes to reply and provide suggestions, etc. And we always do appreciate hearing from you. And before we close, I would just like to do a karakia. Ka whakaaerea te tapu. Kia wātia ai te ara. Kia turuki whakatahi ai. Kia turuki whakataha ai. Haumie huie tāhikie. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.